Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We're going to let people get logged in for this session. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again for joining us. We'll just start in a minute or two. All right, I see a critical mass. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Jeanette Brown. I'm the Senior Director at SCAMP. This session is part of an ongoing series that we've been doing since 2021, in which we invite a developer member to do a project case study. It gives us all a chance to hear what it took to get a project done, the unique challenges, notable features of the development, and how it provided much needed homes in our region. So today we're featuring Isla intersection or Isla intersections. This project is from Holos Communities, and we're joined by Audrey Peterson, who's the Director of Housing Development at Holos. So thank you to Audrey, and Aaron is also here. He's the Director of Communications, and they're going to tell us all about this project. So I'll pass it off to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeanette. And thank you to SCAM for having us here today. I think we're really excited to share this project. I wish it was a how we got it built webinar. It's more like how we're getting it built still, but in the final days. And so I'm really excited to show you guys all what we've been doing the last several years on this parcel. So without further ado, I don't know how to advance slide. Okay, awesome. So we'll go through the acquisition process. A large amount of the time will be spent around our pre-development activities, and then also how construction has been affected by many factors and the lessons learned that we've had from the entire process. Q&A technically is at the end. I think that's normal for how SCAMP has done these webinars. You're welcome to put that in the Q&A or the chat. I think if people could use the Q&A, that's easier for us to maintain, and also, throughout the presentation, please do. So what is Isla? The project itself is at 283 West Imperial. It's in South Los Angeles. It has the Southeast Los Angeles CPIO overlay on it. It's the community plan implementation overlay that'll come up as we talk about the design for the project. I do want to hop back actually one slide and just mention sort of the context that we're building in, right? This project, it looks like an elongated triangle as the site. It is an elongated triangle as the site. It's very unique in its constraints physically, and it's also at the 110 and the 105. You can't quite see the 105 running east-west here, but this is almost one of the most photographed highway intersections in our city and in the country because of just how many layers of highway that we have. And so the context that we're building in is quite polluted, and so our response to that had to be sort of in force as well. I did want to mention our elected official, Marquise Harris Dawson, 8th District, has been instrumental in the project, and you'll hear a little bit about that at the RFP stage during our acquisition, and then throughout the project, and sort of how we've ushered this project along. The project itself is 54 units, 53 of them are permanent supported. Half of those are chronically homeless, the other half homeless. It is your quintessential HHH funded project. And right now our TDC of committed sources is at 36.5. So floating around that 676 mark. And I'll leave that there for now. So starting with acquisition, here's sort of the highlights of the RFP process. This happened in May of 2017. So we're about just over 6 years in the process for this project. There are two big highlights that the project's city team pointed out to us, which was modular or container construction and how we take into account the noise and air pollution of the freeway. And so you'll see our initial design on the bottom right here that has 1, containers, and 2, substantial tree coverage on the site itself. And you'll see different colors of green, and we'll get into that in a couple of slides, but that's actually differences in what's the built condition and what was as our parcel condition. So the built condition that is highlighted in light green is actually part of that elongated triangle that we identified to begin with. However, that dark green is the actual parcel as the parcel map was drawn in 2017. About, I don't know, a small sliver of that actually juts out into Broadway. And so there was a lot of cleaning up that we had to do around those parcel lines. Not that it was called out in the RFP, but I did want to highlight the Broadway Manchester project and the improvements that the city and the city council office has championed for so long. This is a project that's still in the making and is really meant to heighten the Broadway and Manchester corridors. In the Broadway corridor, the extent of the improvements actually end at our site. It ends at 1/12, and our site extends from Imperial up to 1/12. And so how we wanted to tie into that was going to be critical through our design phase and through our pre-development phase. And so part of our discussions post-RFP and with the city was to look at this condition, the built condition. So we have our site itself, which is here. And then we have this black box, which is Athens Way. And we were looking at not only the traffic accidents, but also like what is this way used for, right? We call this Isla because it's an island, but we also say intersections in the sense that how do we intersect what we're doing in the housing space with the other land uses around it? How do we reconnect this island back to the neighborhood that it's in? And one of the biggest ways that we figured out we could do that with is through this street called Athens Way. And in 2017, this was generally just being used as a very fast-tracked way for people to come down Broadway, make 2 right turns, and get back onto the highway. We thought, and the city thought along with us, that traffic, that vehicular traffic, is just as well served along Broadway, making a right on Imperial and then coming back up, or going back out along Imperial. And so we'll talk about this a bit further along, but right, so we had parcel lines to clean up on the site itself, and we did that through a street vacation. And then this we toggled around with also vacating and ended up using a shared street typology. The shared street typology to date, honestly, still has about half a page in the city's mobility plan, and that's it. That's the only guidance that BOE and us and BSS all had on what a shared street was. But we all put our heads together for about 6 months. We had intensive street working group meetings to say, can we define the shared street typology any further? How are we going to plan check a shared street typology? What does that look like? How do, fire trucks still get access to this site? What about the postman? What about trash pickup? All these different city services that normally go down our local streets, boiling that down to a shared street, which is just 12 feet in width. How do we still serve those same needs? And so we actually had between 2018 and 2019 an intensive working group with the city, multiple different departments, on figuring out what that was. That also meant we made a lot of post-RFP changes, right? So the plan that you saw from May of 2017 is very different than how the site looks today. And that was because we toyed around and ended up vacating all of the physical, we ended up vacating enough of the area, so these areas in red, that brought the parcel into alignment with the physical limitations of the site. We also had actually discussed vacating Athens Way and had decided that we could do more, plant more, serve more people and more trees and more pedestrians and more bicyclists if we actually had that as a shared street rather than a vacated street. And so we had left that alone and had the vacation just for the site. We also did start exploring, right, what could actually be done in that shared street. And you heard me mention trees and shrubbery. And so what was born out of that is what we're calling the living lung, which is something we're using on this site, but also multiple other sites on how we build next to freeways. And so how do we add foliage at the tree level, at the shrub level, and at the ground level to naturally clean the air, along with the filtration systems and other upgrades that we make to the building that do that same thing. Okay, so at the end of these processes, strictly the design processes, we ended up with something like that. You can see the streetway coming down quite substantially to 12 feet. We have multiple different walkways that come across. We only have a bike lane that comes into the shared street. All vehicular traffic continues to go down Broadway. There's no longer vehicle traffic coming down onto Athens Way unless they're coming from 113th. So 113th becomes a one-way street with some parking along here. This is actually the most amount of parking we dedicated to the site. The site itself is a TOC site, and so it only has 4 parking spaces. But this is also parking for people coming to an informal commercial shop that exists here, or who want to be along the street or to the apartments on either side of it. What it really meant, though, was so many other spaces being dedicated back to green space and back to natural living. And so all of that is included in this parcel now. All right, so I'm going to spend some significant time on this slide and talk about first actually the shared street and right-of-way and street vacation dedications, and then I'll dive into the CPIO and how we design priorities of design. So because of the vacation, we also had the shared street tied to the project, right? So all of those approvals moved as one. That shared street was written into our street vacation documentation. And so all of the so for the financing folks on the call, all of the improvements and quote unquote offsite improvements that we had dedicated to the shared street, we could include in basis because that street vacation was a necessity for the project itself. And so the whole of the project cost and of the improvements is included in basis, which was a really big important point when we went for tax credits and also to our financing stack. It also, I failed to mention, but the shared street is this is the first privately owned shared street, but it also was really ushered in by CD8 as well. CD8 put forth a motion in October of 2018, right after our TOC and vacation applications in September of 2018, to say, hello, all city departments, this is a priority site for us, and they're doing something very outside of the box. We need all of your attention on that. So I like to think that I have a lot of sway in the city. I absolutely know I do not. And without that motion, we wouldn't be having those conversations, those street working group conversations that we had with BOE and with BOS and DOT and BSL, all of these different city departments at the table. So that was important to note. Those conversations existed between 2018 and 2019. And then our vacation was approved in 2020. And so we paralleled our TOC application for the actual site itself and the development itself and the vacation in September of 2018. The vacation extended out a year and a half, which in vacation terms in the city is actually quite good, I would say. And the TOC was approved in February of 2019. So the entitlements for the development were in place. The vacation took much longer and aligned with when we closed construction financing in March of 2020. I think that's all I'll touch on the shared street and the street vacation for now, and maybe take questions on those things. The other big thing that we ran into were the CPIO requirements. And so two major things came from that. Because we were dedicating so much space of the actual parcel to the building, we actually had to elevate our open space. And so you can see in this image here, we have a series of rooftops that are part of our open space calculations. We also recognize that we are right next to a freeway, right? And so to prevent that noise really hitting these rooftops and allowing them to be wonderful spaces, we had to put the glass barriers. I guess it could be any barrier, but glass in this case, so that people could still be enjoying these spaces at 6 feet with glass. And so that really, it adds a significant amount of cost to the project, but it also allows these spaces to be usable open spaces and not just open spaces for the sake of satisfying the calculation. The other major thing from the CPIO that we encountered is the first floor height limitation, or actually requirement, I would say, to be 14 feet. And that is really just along your street frontage. However, when you're building with containers, there's no extending a container up another few feet. And so we had to specially fabricate these containers that are half heights. And so we had our normal high cube container with a secondary half height container around our full first floor. Again, it's a container project. Our floors do not have the ability to sort of waver between floors by 4 feet or 6 feet. And so that's how we got around that. Again, another thing that added complication to the project and some cost, but is also something that is required from the city, and there's no incentives through TOC around CPIO requirements. And so that was something that we had to do. I do also want to touch on sort of our walkways and how the building is laid out. We have a series of towers, essentially. There's about 15 different stacks. They vary between 5 stories in height and down to 2 stories in height as it comes down towards the north. That allowed for those tiered open space, tiered rooftop areas that we were talking about. It also allows more light and more natural air to come in to the property. There's small spaces between many of these towers, and the towers on the south side are actually positioned in ways that mitigate the effects of the freeway. So noise is rolling off corners rather than hitting a window or hitting a wall straight on. And so those are particularly placed. So yes, it's bringing a lot of value to the project. I think it brings a lot of livability value to our residents when they're on site. I do understand that it also adds more cost and a lot more fabrication for our project teams. And that's, I think, something that we'll need to consider in the future as well, right? What is that balance between not every building needs to be a double loaded corridor versus something like this where you have so much steel, so much painted steel actually on site. And what does that mean? Particularly when in construction, you see rising costs happen in the steel industry. The other thing I wanted to mention, because I was talking about the walls and the windows and making sure you're not getting that noise effect straight onto those walls, was actually a significant amount of wall and window testing pre-construction. So this, to do so, one, we had to do so because it's a new assembly. The container assembly was new to the city, and so to test the window and wall decibels was required for our NEPA clearance and also for our plan approvals. But to do so, we had to have an assembly in place, and so we had ordered a demonstration unit about a year before construction started in 2019 to run all of those tests with the windows that we would be having, with the wall assembly that we had, so that we could run the tests in the factory, get our third-party approvals, and submit that with our permitting. So I haven't touched a ton on the sourcing of the project, on the financial sourcing, because a lot of our sources actually came in significantly and early. So HHH was committed in 2018, and our PBVs were committed in 2019. The Annenberg Foundation, I do want to touch on, that was significantly ushered in by the council office themselves when we talked about the upgrades to the public right-of-way, that shared street. That's not something that we could normally find funding for. That's not an affordable housing use. And so that is fully funded by the Annenberg Foundation. And to do that was really a revelation of how philanthropy can be involved in more multi-benefit projects. I think many times we find ourselves in a difficult position because affordable housing funders only want to fund housing, much like any other funder only wants to fund the purpose of that finance or of that source, whatever that was passed, particularly when it's governmental sources. And philanthropy can really bring a holistic sense to projects by having flexible funding and funding things like a shared street paseo to an affordable housing complex. And we definitely start to work through the ecosystems of having that in place by having a gray water system that is on our parcel and allowed as part of our financing stack, but irrigates the public paseo. And so we're reaping operational benefit from having multiple different and flexible funding sources on the project. The last thing I'll say about pre-development is that when you do something like this, a shipping container or modular project, all of your approvals for anything inside the project go through the state process. And then of course your walkways and your foundations and your on-site construction go through the city process. I would say we kind of had 3 approval agencies because BOE is really our main approval agency for the paseo itself. And so coordinating between all 3, largely the city and the state in pre-construction, and then through the city DBS and city BOE through construction has been a challenge for us. And particularly when they don't have set regulation or set inspections for things, for something like a shared street, it's hard to make sure that all of those conversations that you had during pre-development and in your streets workings group trickle down to the plan checkers that are looking at the projects. Okay, so that was largely on pre-development. On the construction side of things, we'll dive into now. It's been, I did not say this at the beginning, but maybe I should have said this has certainly been a labor of love for our development team and for the team on site as well as the A&E team. So our construction started in March of 2020. And I'm sure alarm bells go off in everyone's mind because March of 2020 was also when COVID began in China and also in the States. The project is a modular project. Its modules were fabricated in China. We had to battle with international shipping costs and timelines. Shipping costs to the port of Los Angeles increased 12 times between pre-pandemic to the height of the pandemic, which was around 2021. We were looking to ship our modules in December of 2020. And so we were looking not only at people ordering more things, less workers at ports and Christmas time and holidays, and looking at that and saying, there's just no way, right? We as Holos are quite small. This project is very important to us, but we are not an Amazon and we are not a Walmart. So delays and also cost increase due to international shipping was a massive factor in our construction timeline. Not only that, when we got stateside, and I'll touch on sort of why we had this bifurcated process to begin with, but when we got stateside, our manufacturer said, hey, we've really had to refocus during COVID and focus our efforts only on what we know, which was not, this was going to be a new process for them, and it was not going to be our project. And so our general contractor, Geis, was able to switch on a dime and really save the project build out of the modules by renting out their own factory and setting up sort of their own fabrication outfit to build out these modules in Southern California before then shipping it to the site. But all to say, that wasn't something that we had planned. It wasn't something GCs had planned. Material and labor shortages were just as prevalent on this project as any other project, and the module sort of outfits that we use. The last thing I'll say is then we moved from the manufacturer sort of outfit and Riverside to on-site, and actually start building out the Paseo along with the site. And we have all sorts of unknown underground conditions. There were abandoned lines, abandoned manholes that may or may not have been abandoned, appeared abandoned, but then had to get discussed with all of the relevant utilities. So a lot of the digging that occurred in the public right-of-way had UTAs on them, and no one had said anything. You start digging and you appear, you run into something undoubtedly. And so when we finished digging in the public right-of-way, it was a great day for all of us because it meant that we would not be impacted by any of those unforeseen circumstances anymore. However, the inspections and difficulties with knowing, not knowing, but how to use different concretes and what's accepted in the city of LA's right-of-way were still significant barriers. I will say, as a highlight, the gray water approval was very difficult to get, but was hard fought and earned. And we were very happy that we could use the gray water system on our project and actually irrigate out into the public right-of-way. There's two lines that move from our project to sort of the right-of-way and then across the street to irrigate everything that we have on there. And the plant specifications that we chose for the Paseo is also catered to gray water. And so to have that approval in place was very beneficial to us and to the operations of the project. I will end on lessons learned because I know we want to leave time for Q&As. But I truly think that this is great precedent for different construction typologies, how you build near freeways, how you build significant projects, not just housing projects, but also parks projects or infrastructure projects, how that all becomes one project in one place. I touched on philanthropy's role in innovation, the desire to see more of that. I would say the biggest lessons learned or warnings may be specific to container construction. How you work within a container is very rigid. The conduit runs that we have are very tight. It's very difficult to squeeze everything up 5 stories in a small container moving upwards, right? All of our conduits and electrical and large utility systems all have to be routed in a circle underground and then straight up through each stack. I would say generally, I'm less inclined to go towards containers in the future, but still quite inclined to look at modular as a way to build. And then the small legalities, maybe they're not small, but they're legalities that you have to take into account, and sort of all those agreements, the covenants, the maintenance agreements in the right of way. That could be a sub bullet under building in the public right of way, but it's something to be cognizant of. It's very difficult to work between parcels, between a public and a private parcel, and how you do that, it needs to be thought through significantly and with a significant amount of contingency alongside it. So I do want to shout out all of our financing partners as well as our on-site and development team. American Family Housing is our co-developer and also has container projects and has been really nice to be able to bounce ideas off of. LMG and Loha and Geis have all been instrumental in the build out of this property, as well as our pre-dev, our acquisition, largely our pre-dev, construction, and firm funders. Thanks to all of you to making this happen. And I will stop there. We can go to some Q&A.
Thanks, Audrey. Start with the first question is, what was the reason for the complexity of the gray water approval process? What could the city have done to be a more proactive partner?
Yeah, they had never done a gray water system from a private parcel to the public right of way. And so setting up, there's no like underground alert system for a gray water line. And so that was a difficulty to overcome with them. We actually built out a lot, or agreed to build out a lot more physical infrastructure to alert people to a gray water line running underneath the street, and have actually stop valves on our property in case that's necessary. Because if someone goes back 20 years in the future and digs up this street again, the UTA won't come to us as Holos for that gray water line. So it was working through like how we could have other infrastructure in place to alert people of that line running down through the street. And then I also think there's just some hesitation around gray water itself. I think people think of it as very dirty, and it's not black water. It's also treated gray water. We treat it on site and then move it out to the plants. And so getting people comfortable around approval of a gray water line in concept was also something that we had to work through with the city.
Great. Another question from Monica is, you said it might be good to do another modular, but not necessarily another container project. Have you done both types? And can you elaborate a bit more on why?
Yeah. So I mentioned a few of the reasons for not wanting to do another container project. I think and I haven't done a modular. We have a few on the books right now, but we don't have another one in construction. The containers are very set. They're rigid. I think one of the things that we wanted to really showcase with containers was a sustainability side, which you don't get as much with containers as you may think. Your structural is either super picky about how you procure them, or they want them to be single use. And so that sort of green aspect is not something you can really take advantage of with containers. My desire to do modular would be from we need more tools to build in LA, in the US, in across the world. And I think on-site construction is a great way to do that. It can't be our only way. And so having another way to do that is important. I think there's a ton of lessons learned from this project. And the next one also probably will have tons of lessons learned, in that third or fourth or fifth modular project will be really when you start to see some of the savings that people think about when they think about modular.
Great. And someone asked, was IIG funding considered to help pay for the Paseo shared street? Why or why not?
It could have been, and honestly, it probably was, but we had funding from Annenberg to pay for that, and just a philanthropy source is more flexible than a state source, and so we didn't pursue that for the project, but it could have been. I don't see a reason why it couldn't have been.
And someone asked for clarity on the insulation of the containers. How does that work?
Yeah. they're fully insulated. I don't know what the question
Okay.
is this specifying for. Um, the wall assembly is actually quite interesting. It has your outside wall assembly, and then we actually have a dead space in the middle of the assembly, and then you have your inner wall. And so um, your inner wall has the insulation attached to it. That dead space is really sort of what we came to ensure that the noise was dying in that wall before it came into the unit. And so we had an acoustical engineer actually create a wall assembly. The Geist team built out that same wall assembly for testing that has your outer wall, which is your corrugated metal and gyp, and then it has dead space that really the noise that's coming from the freeways or the surrounding area comes into that space and falls or dies in that gap, and you have your insulation and interior wall on the other side.
Great. And someone wanted to ask, with the shared street and the landscaping as a lung to cleanse the air from the nearby freeways, how did you test that? And who is responsible for the maintenance of that shared street?
Yes, we are responsible for the maintenance of that shared street. So another reason why the gray water was crucial. We do have in our budget a sort of grounds or park keeper as part of the ongoing operating budget. On the front end for the palette, for the landscaping palette, we had a consultant. We called her the green lung consultant, and she specified um, sort of all that we were looking for, which was one, we want it to be green all year round so that it's really sequestering the CO2 coming out of the environment and creating like a physical barrier that particulate matter is also being caught in. Two, it needed to work with gray water. And three, we wanted it to be native if at all possible. So there's a lot of evergreens in the Paseo. There's some other trees and ground cover as well, but that was sort of the charge that we left her with. She came back to us and said, here are these plants that are going to work here, and here are the effects that we have. We have a big cold green study done for the Paseo itself. And then, yeah, as I touched on, we're the long-term stewards of this land. We actually had a project like scoping session with La Rosa, the Los Angeles Regional Open Space and Affordable Housing Collaborative, to talk about how we can maintain green space sort of most effectively. Gray water was a big system that was encouraged there, and to talk about like what are those things, either movable furniture or actual furniture that we should be putting in there so that people use the space, but it also remains clean. A lot of that came back out during our street working sessions because of what the city will allow in right of way, but could be sort of added back in as movable furniture in the future.
Great. And Will asks, is there anything that the city of LA can do to pre-entitle the land or help streamline all those departmental clearances in advance so that this process for you as the developer doesn't get slowed down?
Yes, pretty much all of our 2018 working sessions would have been done. One thing that I didn't touch on, but really added a significant cost, although we worked it into the project timeline well, was getting power to the site. Right, when we talk about this kind of piece of land, and I'll go back to the maybe this slide is best. Right, there's just street lights here, right? But this is clearly a street median that has just been widened basically over the years. Originally, it was actually a railroad running all the way, like from the port all the way to downtown, and so it's sort of this line here follows the railroad track. But there was nothing here. It's just a concrete pad, and so we actually had to bring power from the corner of Imperial and Broadway, what would that be, southeast corner of Imperial and Broadway. We had to bring that all the way up to our site and to our transformer. That's a lot of undergrounding work that we're doing. South LA also has a moratorium on overhead lines, and so that's even more costs that you see. Having that work done ahead of time would have been huge. Having the parcel lines cleaned up would have also been incredibly helpful. I think um, as they identify, as the city or the county or really any government agency identifies sites, utilities, parcel lines, and sort of maximum unit count are probably those three things, or entitling, I should say, for maximum unit count are those things that I think are most important before developers get on site.
And there were two questions again about the unit cost, which I think you said was 647,
Right now it's at 676.
676. And what was the AMI mix?
They're all at 30%.
Okay. That answers those questions. And then there was just one more question about what is the difference between homeless and chronically homeless?
Yeah, there's an official definition, and I hope I get it right. Although if there's any services people on the line, they could do it too. But chronically homeless is homeless for more than 2 years or 3 years in the last 5, and homeless is anyone currently on the street
Great. Well, those
or
are
in
all.
shelter, I should say.
Great. Well, those are all the questions. So we're gonna end it here to be respectful of Audrey's time. But thank you so much, Audrey, for taking the time to walk us through this project. And we will share the recording and the slides with everyone who was registered today. Any last words,
So,
Audrey?
no, thanks so much, and I'm hopeful it's helpful. If there's any other questions, you're welcome to reach out to me or to Erin. We can direct them and follow up separately.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Jeanette. Bye.